I knew someone was stealing from me when my water bill hit triple digits, and my grass still looked like it had survived a forest fire. Not dry, not patchy. I mean scorched. Meanwhile, 2 houses over, Karen's lawn looked like a botanical garden curated by angels. Her roses sparkled in the morning dew. Her tulips stood upright like soldiers on parade. I'm talking about a yard that made you feel like you weren't good enough to even look at it. And the kicker? We were in the middle of a water restriction. Same schedule, same limitations. So unless her plants were bathing in bottled Evian, something didn't add up. See, where I live, lawn care isn't just upkeep. It's a sport. And I don't lose. My system is customized. Timed sprinklers, moisture sensors, soil analytics. I could tell you my front yard's pH from memory. So when I saw that creeping brown patch forming by the hydrangeas, I didn't blame the sun. I blamed sabotage. At first, I checked for a leak. Nothing. The controller log said everything was normal, watering twice a week, 30 minutes a pop. But the soil data? Way off. It showed drainage levels like I was flooding the yard, even though the roots were dry. Like the water was going somewhere, but not to my plants. Then I saw her, Karen. She waddled past my mailbox like she owned the concrete under her sandals. Her arms were full of fresh-cut roses, practically bursting with smugness. She made eye contact, gave me that smirk she saves for when she's about to file a complaint about decorative wind chimes or mailboxes that are too whimsical, and said, "Some of us just have a green thumb, I guess." "Oh yeah? Then why is your hose connected to my line?" It all started making sense. Karen, the self-declared queen of the HOA, short blonde hair, frosted tips that glowed like a warning sign. She wore matching velour tracksuits, usually pink, like it was still 2004, and she was starring in her own suburban reality show. She'd fine you for leaving a trash can out 10 minutes too long, but she'd park her SUV half over the curb like she was doing the neighborhood a favor. Everyone hated her, but no one stood up to her. Because she didn't just run the HOA, she was the HOA. She controlled the board. She was the board. And if you crossed her, forget passive aggression. She'd come for your mailbox, your hedges, your property value. She once fined an army veteran for planting sunflowers without proper spacing clearance. That's who we're dealing with. So now I knew where my water was going, right into Karen's pipes. The woman had figured out how to siphon off my irrigation system and feed it to her thirsty designer roses like it was a shared neighborhood resource. And the worst part, she knew I'd notice eventually. That's what made her smile so irritating. She wanted to get caught, wanted to make it look like she was untouchable. She'd already turned the HOA into her personal court. So what's one more trophy for her collection? But she didn't know who she was stealing from. She didn't know that I built that irrigation system myself, from scratch. Every valve, every connector, every buried hose. I knew it all like a conductor knows his symphony. I didn't just install it to water my lawn. I installed it because I loved the precision, the order, the control. And now that control had been hijacked by a pink tracksuit-wearing tyrant with a rose fetish and zero shame. That's when I stopped being just a homeowner with a dying lawn. That's when I became the chosen one. Because every neighborhood has that one person. The one who keeps the peace. The one who pushes back when someone crosses the line. Not out of pettiness, out of principle. And unfortunately for Karen, that was me. I was the line. And she had just trampled all over it in Crocs and garden gloves. The signs had been there. The odd spike in pressure readings. The unexplained dips in flow rate. At first I chalked it up to a calibration issue. Maybe the sensors were off. Maybe the pump was underperforming. But when I dug deeper, everything checked out, until I got to the output logs. One of the secondary lines had been running longer than the others, only by a few minutes. Just enough to be sneaky. just enough to hide the theft. That line ran alongside the property edge, the side that shared a fence with Karen. And then I remembered something else. Last summer, during one of her casual inspections, she walked right up to that corner of the yard, clipboard in hand, supposedly checking for fence violations. I didn't think much of it then, but now, that was probably when she scoped the valve, figured out how it worked, maybe even tested it. Because Karen doesn't do anything casually. Every move is calculated, every action, weaponized. I didn't react right away. That's how she wins, by baiting people into blowing up and looking unreasonable. So I played it cool, pretended not to notice, let her think she was clever, let her soak up my water with her smug smile and her overpriced rose shears. I needed time to prepare, because if she wanted a silent war over sprinkler systems, she'd get it. Only I wouldn't fight her with rules and complaints. I'd fight her with science, with pH manipulation, with dye, with vinegar. She wasn't ready. She thought she was clever. She thought no one would catch her. But the second I confirmed that Karen was siphoning my water, I went from curious neighbor to mad scientist with a vengeance plan. I wasn't just going to stop her. I was going to humiliate her. Not publicly, not loudly. That's not how people like Karen get taken down. No, this was going to be silent, surgical, and petty in all the right ways. And colourful. Very, very colourful. I got to work in my garage, mixing a solution with the precision of a chemist and the intent of an artist with a grudge. I used high-concentration cleaning vinegar, not the store-bought stuff, the kind that makes your nose crinkle before the bottle even opens. Safe, non-toxic, and totally devastating to delicate plants like roses. Add to that a landscaping-safe but visually dramatic pink dye, the kind used in fountains and holiday water features, and I had myself a masterpiece. The shade? Not subtle, not pastel. Think bubblegum mixed with neon. Think Barbie on fire, the kind of pink that screams for attention and refuses to apologize for it. I tested it in a closed loop on my secondary line to make sure it wouldn't damage my system. Ran it through, flushed it out, confirmed. Everything worked flawlessly. No harm to my setup. But any plant receiving a steady dose of this potion? It wouldn't die, but it would definitely look like it had been assaulted by a hot pink highlighter and dipped in vinegar salad dressing. But the real art was in the delivery. I installed a hidden valve just before the hose connector Karen had tapped into. Remote controlled. Timed. Invisible. I set it to trigger at 6:55 a.m., 5 minutes before her usual early morning thievery. Every Monday and Thursday, like clockwork, she'd wander out in her slippers, reach behind her garden bed, and casually twist open the stolen tap like she was borrowing a cup of sugar. So I programmed the system to flip the valve just before that. She'd think she was getting her usual haul of clean water, when in fact, she'd be dosing her beloved roses with a sour, stinking pink surprise. And because revenge tastes better when it's layered, I added one last detail, a sulfur-based odor enhancer, the kind used in propane so humans can smell leaks. Just a whiff of it in the solution, barely detectable to machines, but unmistakably foul to any human nostril. It wasn't dangerous, but it would make her whole garden smell like bad eggs soaked in nail polish remover, a scent no HOA brunch guest could ignore. The next morning came fast. I was up early, pretending to enjoy my coffee while secretly watching the clock tick toward the moment of impact. And then it happened. A shriek, loud, shattering. The kind of scream someone lets out, not from pain, but from total disbelief. A pure, shocked betrayal. It was followed by gasps, footsteps, chaos. I casually walked outside, coffee in hand, acting like I had no idea what was going on. Karen stood in her yard, soaked from the waist down, flailing her arms like her hose had turned on her. Her pristine white roses were streaked with bright pink. their petals blotched like they'd been caught in a paintball ambush. Her marble garden path looked like it had hosted a Kool-Aid sacrifice. Her guests, at least half the HOA board, stood frozen, holding tiny teacups and cucumber sandwiches, watching the horror unfold. A few had already started filming. Karen stormed across the lawn, stomping through puddles of pink water, her gloves stained, her matching pink tracksuit now 2 shades darker and 3 sizes wetter. She charged at me, furious and soaked, jabbing a finger in my face. "What did you do?" she shrieked, nose scrunched against the smell, her voice trembling with disbelief. I raised an eyebrow, took a long, slow sip of my coffee, and said, "What did I do? Looks like you've got a plumbing issue. Could be backflow contamination. Very common when people connect to systems they're not supposed to." The words hit her like a slap. She froze, eyes wide, caught between rage and panic. "I'll have you reported," she hissed, shaking her glove. "This is a violation of community standards." I smiled. "Oh, I'm counting on it," I said, then turned and walked back inside as she screamed my name like a cartoon villain promising vengeance. She filed the complaint the very next day. Her formal letter to the HOA read like a Shakespearean monologue, full of drama, accusations, and phrases like malicious sabotage and hostile landscaping tactics. She claimed I contaminated her irrigation access she wasn't supposed to have, and emotionally harmed her with unnatural hues and invasive scents. She demanded an emergency review by the HOA board. Of course, they scheduled it. Appearances had to be maintained, but everyone already knew what it was. Karen trying to spin the mess she created into yet another crusade for power. When the meeting day arrived, I showed up relaxed. Laptop in one hand, coffee in the other. Karen was already seated, arms crossed, lips pursed so tight they could cut steel. She brought visual aids, photos of her poor vandalized roses, the dye-streaked lawn ornaments, a soaked flyer from her garden club. She stood up and delivered a speech that would have made a courtroom TV actor jealous, pointing fingers, talking about trauma, water abuse, bioaggression, whatever that means. She even quoted the HOA charter wrongly and invoked neighborhood unity like it was a sacred relic. Then it was my turn. I opened my laptop, clicked a few times, and played a silent set of irrigation system logs, exact timestamps, flow rates, line activation, source valves, everything automated. Then I added one more slide, a diagram of my system's anti-tamper zones. The final cherry, a screenshot of her illegal hose splitter installation from last week's inspection notice, filed anonymously, with a GPS-tagged location code. The room was dead silent. Then Dave, the retired firefighter, the only sane person on the board, leaned forward, rubbed his face and muttered, "Well, damn, Karen." She didn't even try to deny it, pivoted immediately, said I had given her verbal permission at the last HOA potluck. I reminded her I hadn't even attended, because she banned me for bringing chili with beans, calling it culinarily aggressive. Everyone laughed. Karen turned beet red. Her hands trembled. But the board, hands tied, couldn't fine her, not without an exact rule violation. There wasn't a clause for getting wrecked by pink water. That was fine by me, because I wasn't after punishment. I wasn't trying to get her removed. Yet. I just wanted her to know that I saw her, that I'd caught her, that I'd matched her petty with petty, her stealth with strategy. I wanted her to realize she wasn't untouchable. She was beatable, and worse, she was predictable. I stood up, closed my laptop, and walked out with the calm satisfaction of someone who knew the battle had just begun. Karen had played her move. I'd played mine. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Karen made one mistake after the HOA meeting. She assumed I was done. That the pink water, the public embarrassment, and the fact her roses now looked like they'd been tie-dyed at a preschool art class was the end of the road. She must have thought I'd feel satisfied with a single win, that I'd back off and let her slip back into her lavender-scented illusion of power. But that's the thing about people like her. They never stop. They just regroup. And I knew she'd be back for round 2. That woman wasn't wired for surrender. No, she was the kind of person who'd double down even when she was already neck-deep in disaster. Sure enough, 2 mornings later, I stepped outside and noticed something subtle. The gravel around my hose access point had been disturbed. Not like a wind-blown mess, more like someone had carefully lifted and reset each piece, like they were trying to leave no trace. But I knew my yard. I could tell when one stone was out of place, and this looked like a weak attempt at stealth. I followed the trail. Sure enough, the splitter was back, newer, shinier, and tucked under a bed of mulch, like it had been planted there by a raccoon with an engineering degree. Karen had come back, upgraded her hose connector, and rerouted it through the corner of her backyard, like nothing had happened. The audacity would have been breathtaking if it wasn't so painfully predictable. But what Karen didn't realize was that while she was busy playing irrigation ninja, I'd been working in the background. Quietly, methodically, like someone preparing for a siege. My system now had real-time pressure sensors, flow monitors, even water quality scanners. If a bug sneezed near my valve, I'd get a notification. So when she tried to activate her setup again, I knew the exact moment the water pressure changed. It was 6:52 a.m. I was already halfway through my morning toast. The alert pinged. I smiled. This time I didn't even wait. I flipped the valve on schedule and watched the whole thing unfold. The pink solution came bursting through her line again. But this time the system had just a touch more pressure, enough to backfire. The result? A high-pressure geyser that shot out of one of her decorative sprinklers and sprayed directly into her prize-winning rose arch. She was already outside, wearing her usual outfit, tight capri leggings, rubber gardening clogs, and a visor that looked like it was lifted from a 1980s aerobics video. She lunged for the hose to shut it off, but twisted the valve the wrong way and ended up blasting herself from the knees down in a full arc of vinegar-laced hot pink water. She screamed, again, and stumbled backward, arms flailing, water dripping from her visor like a soaked beach towel. Her scream wasn't angry this time. It was broken, confused, like she couldn't process that the very system she thought she'd outsmarted had once again turned on her. And just when she thought it couldn't get worse, her landscaper showed up. A young guy in cargo shorts and a ball cap, holding a leaf blower and sipping from a massive energy drink. He took one look at the neon-colored disaster, took a long sip and said, "Nope, I'm not touching haunted plumbing." He turned around, got in his truck, and peeled out without another word. But Karen? She didn't give up. She retaliated. Again. That same afternoon, a glossy flyer showed up in every mailbox on the block. "Beautify with Unity," it said in gold script, featuring a photo of Karen in front of a heavily filtered garden shot, holding a watering can like she was in a gardening magazine. The flyer proposed a community irrigation initiative, claiming that sharing water was the neighborly thing to do, and that some residents were hoarding water for selfish purposes. She even suggested the installation of a flow meter, one she'd personally monitor, because apparently the solution to water theft was just organized water theft. I didn't respond, not publicly. What would be the point? Arguing with Karen in writing is like trying to explain taxes to a raccoon. Instead, I got creative. I kept her line active. I let the water flow through it. Sometimes. Just enough to make her think she was winning again. It would spray for 20 seconds, then sputter. Sometimes it would run clean. Other times it would stop halfway through. I started playing with the pressure just enough to keep it inconsistent, erratic enough to stress out her plants, not kill them, but confuse them. Petals started curling. Leaves drooped at weird angles. The bees stopped visiting. Her garden looked like it was stuck in a bad dream, and every time she adjusted the hose, tested the pressure, or tried to fix the problem, she looked more and more unhinged. That's when I knew it was time to finish the job. I switched out the pink dye. It had served its purpose. This time, I went with orange, bright, aggressive, impossible to ignore. The kind of orange used for road cones and emergency flares. And instead of vinegar, I loaded the system with a fully biodegradable but absolutely rancid fish emulsion fertilizer. Still safe, still legal. But the smell? Imagine a seafood dumpster in the middle of a July heatwave. Multiply it by 2. That's what I pumped into her stolen line. I timed it perfectly. Because Karen had been planning another garden showcase, a full HOA event, complete with RSVPs, refreshments, and even folding chairs set up along the sidewalk so people could admire the harmony of structured flora. Her words, not mine. I knew exactly when it would start. She'd been bragging about it online all week. Community Aesthetic Alignment Day, she called it. I set the system to trigger at 9 a.m. sharp, right when the guests would be settling in with their mini muffins and tiny plastic cups of lemon water. And oh, it was glorious. The moment the sprinkler came on, a thick, arching stream of neon orange water erupted into the air and soaked the entire center of her rose garden. It hit the mulch, the stones, the lawn ornaments, and most importantly, it hit Karen, right across the hip like she'd been body-checked by a fish market. The smell wafted instantly, eyes watered. Someone gagged. A woman dropped her purse and started coughing uncontrollably. A kid started crying. People backed away from the garden like it was ground zero for a hazmat emergency. The entire gathering dissolved in under 60 seconds. Karen flailed at the valve, hands slick, twisting it the wrong way again, and unleashing a final burst that sprayed across her lawn flamingos, staining them a deep, vomit orange. Her guests scattered. Someone yelled, "It smells like a tuna graveyard," and another person took off sprinting to their car, holding their nose. Her grand vision of neighborhood unity, gone in an instant, replaced by the scent of fermented anchovies and an HOA board that now looked ready to jump ship entirely. She didn't speak to me after that, not directly, but the message was received, loud and pungent. And the best part? I hadn't broken a single rule, not one. I simply provided water to a line that technically wasn't mine anymore. After all, she'd claimed access. She'd built her little empire on that connection. All I did was fulfill it. And I wasn't done. Not yet. After the fish emulsion incident, everything shifted. Not just the air, which, let's be honest, didn't smell right for a solid 3 days, but the entire energy of the neighborhood. Karen, who once strutted through the cul-de-sac like she owned every fence post and flower bed, suddenly moved differently. Quieter, slower. She kept her head down, avoided eye contact, and for the first time in HOA history, missed her morning patrol. Her porch sat untouched. No flyers, no new signs, no inspirational quotes about unity and proper mulch alignment. Just silence. But I knew better. Karen wasn't surrendering. She was regrouping. People like her don't just give up. They wait. They crawl back into their floral lairs, lick their wounds, and plot their next move with a pen, a clipboard, and way too many passive-aggressive bullet points. And then, right on cue, it happened. A new hose line. Reinforced this time, like she'd upgraded her gear from garden thief to irrigation arms dealer. I found it while checking the soil sensors on the property line. It wasn't just another sneaky tap. She'd actually modified one of my old sprinkler heads and connected a disguised coupler, buried under fresh mulch and surrounded by a decoy flower pot. It was a full-blown infrastructure rebuild. She was getting bold, or desperate, maybe both. But that wasn't even the craziest part. The very next day, a sign appeared on the neighborhood bulletin board. Glossy, laminated, and framed in fake gold leaf. It read, "True neighbors share more than fences. They share futures." Next to the quote was a photo of Karen, posed dramatically in front of her garden like she was running for HOA president of the universe. The audacity wasn't just back, it was turbocharged. I didn't say a word, didn't confront her, didn't report it. I let her have her moment, because that's what she needed. She needed to feel like she was winning again. She needed to think the tide had turned. That's when people like Karen make their worst decisions. When they believe the universe is smiling on them, they reach too far. And sure enough, she started inviting people to another event. Another garden demo. This time she called it the Spring Awakening. There would be iced tea, finger foods, a neighborhood raffle, and, her words not mine, an interactive irrigation showcase. Perfect. I prepped the system with care. No last-minute switches, no sloppy connections. I flushed out the fish emulsion and replaced it with something new. A synthetic compost tea. Non-toxic. Safe for humans. But it had the distinct scent of rotting lettuce mixed with swamp water. It wasn't as pungent as the fish blend, but it lingered. Subtle at first, then it hit you like a slow, creeping regret. The kind of smell that makes people instinctively squint and ask, "Is something off?" I dyed it again. This time not pink, not orange, but a deep, vibrant green. Not a nice green either, not mint or sage. This was fluorescent neon algae green, like a frog had exploded in your sprinkler system. I mixed it just right to look eerily unnatural without crossing into horror movie territory. Just odd enough to raise eyebrows, just weird enough to kill appetites. She scheduled the event for a Sunday morning, bright and early. People showed up in their spring best, holding reusable cups and wearing pastel polos like they were about to tour a winery. Karen stood at the head of her lawn, hair freshly curled, makeup a bit too enthusiastic, holding court like a queen finally restored to her throne. She welcomed people, pointed out her award-winning rose beds, and gestured proudly toward the new sprinkler system, which, of course, she claimed was her own eco-efficient innovation. At exactly 10 a.m., the system activated. A perfect stream of algae green mist began to spray from her custom nozzles, catching the sunlight just right to cast a sickly glow across her lawn. The smell took a minute, then it arrived, slow, like a wave crawling over sand, settling deep into every nostril. You could see it on their faces, the sudden nose twitch, the polite attempts to ignore it. Someone coughed. A child asked, "Mommy, why does it smell like the pond at Grandma's house?" Another guest quietly retreated, covering their drink. Karen, ever oblivious to her own demise, kept smiling, until she noticed the discoloration. Her roses, the leaves, the fresh wood chips she'd laid out in geometric perfection, all now tinged with radioactive-looking green streaks. Her lips curled. She froze, her jaw clenched. She turned slowly to look toward the shared property line, like she was expecting me to be watching. I wasn't out front. I didn't need to be. Because 10 minutes later, during the inevitable HOA fallout, I heard from Dave. The guests had gone home early, most too nauseated to finish their snacks. Karen tried to blame seasonal algae bloom from rainwater collection, but nobody was buying it. Someone had already posted a video on the neighborhood message board. Caption: "This is what community unity smells like." The likes climbed fast. Later that week, an official HOA meeting was called. Not by Karen, but by Dave. And this time, it wasn't just about rogue sprinklers. No, This time, things got serious, because Karen hadn't just been messing with my system. It turned out several residents had come forward with complaints about shady maintenance fees, surprise fines, unexplained charges for services no one received. One homeowner said they'd been paying $40 a month for sidewalk flower maintenance, even though they didn't have a sidewalk. Another claimed Karen fined them for having off-brand stepping stones. An investigation began, quietly at first, but then the board received a complaint from the city's water division. Apparently, someone had flagged Karen's DIY irrigation work as a backflow risk. She was accused of connecting improperly to a private system without any anti-siphon protection, which, in city terms, meant she could potentially contaminate everyone's water. That was the final crack. Karen didn't show up to the next board vote. She sent a dramatic email about personal reflection and being misunderstood in a community resistant to visionary leadership. The board voted unanimously to strip her of her title as HOA president, effective immediately. Dave stepped in as interim. The silence across the block that night was different. Not tense, not watchful, just calm, like the neighborhood had collectively exhaled for the first time in years. Days passed. No flyers, no warning notes, no morning rounds with her clipboard of doom. Her porch lights remained off. Her garden, once the loudest part of the block, now stood strangely still. But then, one morning, a final message arrived. A letter, delivered to every mailbox. No return address. No signature on the outside. Just plain white envelopes sealed with tape. Inside? A typed note in the most aggressively formal font imaginable. Karen's farewell. Or so she claimed. It read more like a threat than a goodbye. She accused unnamed neighbors, clearly me, of orchestrating a campaign of psychological sabotage through pressurized horticultural misdirection. She referred to the dye as weaponized pigments and called the fish water incident eco-terrorism, masquerading as creative landscaping. She said the neighborhood didn't deserve her. And then, in her final paragraph, she announced that she'd sold the house, was moving to a more refined community where her leadership would be welcomed, not feared. She closed it with a quote from herself. "Every rose has thorns, but some weeds disguise themselves as neighbors." She left 2 days later. Moving trucks arrived early, and she didn't say a word to anyone. The pink hose was coiled up among her garden supplies, still stained, still looped like a trophy of her failure. She climbed into the passenger seat of her car, pulled her visor down, and vanished down the street. That night, the whole neighborhood felt different. Doors were open. People waved again. Someone brought out lemonade. Kids were drawing chalk art on the sidewalks, something Karen had once banned as unauthorized artistic expression. We held a potluck that weekend. No sign-up sheets, no fines, no regulations, just real food and real laughter. Someone even brought a chili with beans. I won. Not because Karen left, but because peace returned. Because the lawn was green, the system ran perfectly, and the only thing staining the garden now was sunlight. And somewhere near the fence line, a new flower bed bloomed. Wildflowers, bees buzzing, colors loud and free. A small quiet reminder, some battles are fought with swords, others with hoses, dye, and a whole lot of patience.